Welcome to the Dean Blechman Show, live from Long Island. Free-flowing talk with a charismatic, down-to-earth host. Join Dean as he interviews and chats freely with his guests, ranging from superstar athletes to politicians, industry titans, and everyday folk with fascinating life stories. Dean educates, entertains, and most of all, touches people's lives. You're listening to the Dean Blechman Show, live from Long Island.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dean Blechman Show. Today's Tuesday, March 21st. It's about 45 degrees, cloudy here in New York, Long Island, but I couldn't even sleep last night. I am so pumped and excited about this show today and my special featured guest, Dr. Abdul El-Sayed. Abdul, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on today, Dean.
Good. And I'm going to, everybody, it's going to be Abdul to me. And Abdul and I had an opportunity. The first time I met Abdul was as a young man and student, still a young man, but we had an opportunity to meet during the years of 2005, 2006. My son, Jared, was a student, undergraduate student at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and happened to be a lacrosse teammate with Abdul. And those were some of the greatest years of my life. And it was at that time that I saw this extremely aggressive, take charge person. He used to play defense. He used to beat the heck out of my son, trying to score against him in practice. But I saw someone with a lot of smarts and go-get, and I'm not surprised that he's not standing on the sidelines anymore. And he's now a candidate and running for governor of the state of Michigan. So I'm so happy to have you here today.
Well, it's an honor and a privilege, and I appreciate the really warm introduction. It's particularly good to be able to reach out and connect to people from your past lives, and I remember those days fondly, and they're really, really great times for me as well.
Listen, it's very important, not only with what you're doing in the state of Michigan, but I really want to make sure that all my listeners from around the world really know who Dr. Abdul El-Sayed is. And as I said, I'm going to call him on this show Abdul. But Abdul was raised in Michigan. He was most recently the executive director of the Detroit Health Department and is currently, as I said, a candidate for governor in Michigan. Abdul is a Rhodes Scholar, earning a doctorate from Oxford University and a medical degree from Columbia University. As a public health professor, as an internationally recognized expert in health policy and health inequalities, and the author of over 100 scholarly articles, abstract, and book chapters on public health policy, social epidemiology, and health disparities. He's written essays on public health policy that have been published throughout the New York Times, CNN, The Hill, Huffington Post, the Detroit News, and the Detroit Press. It just goes on and on. This young man is just remarkable. At 30 years old of age, Abdul became the youngest health official of a major city when you were brought home by the Mayor Duggan to build Detroit's health department after it was privatized during the city's bankruptcy. As the health director, Abdul was responsible for the health and safety of over 670,000 Detroiters, working tirelessly to ensure government accountability and transparency, promote health, and reduce cross-generational poverty. After witnessing the systematic failures of government only a few miles away in Flint, Abdul worked so hard to ensure that children attending Detroit schools and daycares were drinking lead-free water. He also served expectant mothers and women by creating programs aimed at reducing infant mortality and unplanned pregnancy. Abdul built a program to give school children across the city glasses if they needed them. He also stood up for children with asthma by taking on corporations that wanted to pump more pollutants into our air, working with them to reduce emissions and invest in parks. I mean, remarkable. The Detroit Health Department has become a state and national leader in public innovation and environmental justice in one of the fastest municipal public health turnarounds in American history. I am that excited and humbled and extremely proud of you.
Well, I appreciate that. I do hope that we can bring a lot of that same energy and innovation to the state, which really, really needs it right now.
Well, not just the state. As I said earlier, I want through my, as I said a year ago when I launched the Dean Blechman Show, and I said that I want to inspire and educate. So beyond, not only do I want to get your story and your mission out, not only to the state of Michigan, but as I said, throughout the United States and throughout the world. So once again, very honored and humbled for you and your busy schedule to make time. And what I think there's no better appropriate time than to get started with, your personal story. I mean, you're only 32 years old. I mean, if you could just share with everybody your upbringing and bring us up to speed with growing up and at this point of 32 years of age.
Yeah, I was really lucky to be born and raised in this super diverse family. My parents immigrated from Egypt back in the late 70s. My dad was between coming to the United States and going to Germany, and he chose to come to the United States because he believed that it was going to be the kind of place that he could thrive and could raise children who could be, aspired to do anything in their society as equal thriving members of that society. And given the ideals of this country and its history of accepting and engaging immigrants, he felt like he had his best shot in the United States. And so he came here to go to attend Wayne State University and do his PhD in Detroit. And he got married a couple years later, and my parents, they had me. I was a bit of a one-hit wonder. They then got divorced really quick. And they both remarried. And my dad remarried a white American woman named Jackie from Gratiot County, Michigan, which is in the middle of the state. And so I grew up in this house, which was part Egyptian, part white American, and 100% American. And I grew up really loving two very big things: science and people. And my parents were both engineers, and so science was just the way we sort of thought about the world in our household. And I was lucky enough to be exposed to all kinds of people as a child, and so I can't think of anything more interesting, important than the things that make people go, who they are, the experiences they've had, the aspirations that they hold dear to them, the people they love, and even sometimes the trials and tribulations that they face. And so I wanted to use science to help people, and so decided pretty early on that I was really interested in medicine, and I wanted to be a doctor. I got to, I was in high school. I wasn't always the greatest student. I used to get bored really quickly in class, and so would sort of goof off. But the thing that kept me really focused was sports. I played football, I wrestled, and I played lacrosse, and all three of them really, really important to me. And I knew that I had to keep up really good grades to be able to keep playing. My father, of course, from his upbringing, sports was something you did on the side only if you were excelling at school. It wasn't sort of seen as something that you did as a part of your necessary growth and development as a young person. And so for me, I had to get really good grades to be able to keep playing sports. And so I did, thankfully. And I ended up getting an opportunity to go to the University of Michigan, which I grew up idolizing. For me, as a kid growing up in Michigan, that winged helmet was everything. And on football Saturdays, that's what you did. You just watched Michigan play. And so I got to go to Michigan, and there I studied things I was interested in, biology and political science. And folks would always make fun of me because they never quite understood how I was going to put those two things together. But for me, those were the things that I really enjoyed. If politics is the way that we as a society organize ourselves to leverage our scarce resources, there's a clear there's a clear translation in the body as well, which is biology, right? The body does the same thing. How do you organize to leverage your scarce resources? And that those two systems, to me, seem to be very parallel. One operating at the societal level, and one operating at the level of a single body. And so studied these two things and got to play lacrosse, which is an incredible experience. Got to meet Jared, your son, and shared a number of really great road trips and experiences with him and the other guys on the team. And then my senior year, got married. I met my beautiful wife Sarah on campus there, and we got married. And so I didn't quite feel like I had the same amount of time left to be able to play lacrosse. So my senior year, I quit and had a lot of time on my hands, and then discovered public health. And I realized that public health was that thing that brought politics and political science and bio. It was the thing that sat in between those two big interests of mine, and so really fell in love with it. And I started working for a professor who was doing some really cutting edge research to try and understand how we could prevent disasters, what it was that societies did to invest in their communities to prevent things like tornadoes and hurricanes from becoming all-out human disasters, and really fell in love with the science of public health, which is epidemiology. And so as I graduated, I'd already been accepted to medical school and was planning to go to the University of Michigan. I'd gotten a full ride scholarship there, which I was really lucky to get. And this mentor of mine, who I started working with as a senior, invited me to do a PhD with him, and in PhD in epidemiology. Alongside my medical degree. And so at that point I said, that sounds great. My wife and I, we bought a condo in Ann Arbor, and we were good to go. And then another mentor who I actually met through lacrosse, one of our coaches suggested, you should consider applying for these international fellowships, the Rhodes and the Marshall Scholarship, because, well, you might have a good shot at it. And at that point, I didn't really think why I would even do this. I'd already been accepted to what I wanted to do. But on a whim, I decided that I would apply. And in the end, I ended up winning them both. And I ended up taking the Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford. And there I did my PhD in public health with a focus on health disparities and obesity. Why is it that minority communities and the poor are more likely to be obese than others, and we were using some cool computer simulation to be able to get at that and to build models that policymakers could use to better understand how to prevent obesity in their communities. And while I was away, my mentor moved to New York to take on a role at Columbia University. So when I came home, he was no longer going to be there, and I had thought that I wanted to continue to work with him. So I moved my entire MD PhD program to Columbia. And finished up my studies there. And while I was at Columbia, I came to realize that I was a lot more interested in public health than I was in medicine. All my classmates, when we were on the wards taking care of patients, they would ask the obvious questions that doctors ask, which are really good questions. What can I do for my patient? How can I make this person better again? Which were questions that I was asking, but I was a lot more interested in how my patient got there in the first place. What was the failure in our public health system that allowed this patient to get here in the first place? Why are they sick, and why is someone else not sick? And what can be done about that at a societal level? And so I decided that instead of doing a residency like most graduate doctors did, I was a lot more interested in working on health policy. And so applied for a couple of positions as a professor, one back home in Michigan and one in New York. And I didn't get the Michigan job, but I got the job at Columbia in New York. And meanwhile, my wife was finishing up medical school as well at Columbia, so it worked out okay. And spent a year and a half as a professor there at Columbia. Really enjoyed my life. It was fantastic. I got to travel the world and mentor students and do some really, I think, impactful research about public health policy, but realized that I'd gotten really far away from what animated my work in the first place, which is the goal of being able to make people healthier, to use science to improve the lives of real people. And so realized I needed to make a switch. And I was sitting with the same mentor of mine who I started working with when I was a senior in college. And I told him, I think I'm done with academia. I think I need to get my hands dirty. And he said, what do you want to do? I said, I think I want to be health commissioner for Detroit. He said, well, look, there's only one of those. You're not him. And so, maybe someday, but right now you really should focus on your tenure. I reached out to a number of friends of mine who were in Detroit in the moment, learned a lot about what Mayor Duggan was doing and was pretty excited about it. I was going to be in town 2 or 3 weeks later, so I emailed a friend of mine. I asked to grab lunch, and he obliged. And then I dropped some CVs with him, and I said, look, if you can get these to the mayor, great. If not, no worries. I really appreciate it. A week later, I get a call from the mayor, and he says, look, are you interested in a public health job in Detroit? I said, absolutely. He said, look, let's meet in another week and a half, and we'll talk about it. So I spent the next week and a half learning everything I could about public health in Detroit, and I learned some pretty terrifying things. The first was that the likelihood of a baby dying in the city of Detroit before its first birthday is higher than it is in Mexico. I also learned that the asthma rate in Detroit was about 3 times as high as the rest of the state of Michigan, and that Detroit accounted for more than 50% of all lead poisonings in the entire state of Michigan. And I also learned that the reasons that those had a lot to do with the way that the city was organized. You have a huge city. You can fit all of Boston, San Francisco, and Manhattan in the city of Detroit and still have room left over.
Amazing.
And then it's pretty empty because of the push and pull of socioeconomic factors and racism. The city. You could fit about 2 million people in the city of Detroit and only has about 700,000 people in it. And so it's pretty empty. And the people who are there tend to be folks who over time were systematically poorer and less advantaged than the people who left. And then lastly, despite the fact that we call Detroit the Motor City, only about 40% of Detroiters have access to a car. Another 40% may have a car, but it's used by so many people or it's so broken down. They can't really rely on it. And then 20% of Detroiters have no car at all. And there's no public transportation system in Detroit beyond busing because Detroit was built by the automotive industry. And so they really invested in highways. You have highways all over the city, but almost no public transportation to speak of. And so you have a big city that's pretty empty and almost nobody can get around. That's the reason the challenges in Detroit are what they are. So I sat down with the mayor and I talked to him about my vision for public health, which was that we needed to be focused on how health contributes to poverty in the city and to be able to break down the barriers that children have to being able to learn and earn in the city of Detroit like any other child anywhere else. And so, he said, look, you're hired for the health job. I said, I don't really know which health job, but that sounds great. He said, look, the director job, I want you to rebuild the Detroit health department. And then he asked, have you ever had a job like this before? I said, no. And he said, how old are you? I said, I'm 30. He said, well, look, I was 29 when I got my first really high impact job, and I worked really hard. And if you're willing to work hard, I know you can be successful. So at that point, I was appointed health director for the city of Detroit. I was the youngest health director in any major U.S. city, and had probably one of the hardest jobs in the country. But we got right to work. I walked into a department that had 5 city employees and 85 contracted staff. Within a year and a half, we had 220 people in our department. We were working across goals to be able to achieve that end of disrupting intergenerational poverty via health. We were doing things like giving kids glasses for free, delivered at school if they needed them, because we found that about 30% of our kids who needed glasses weren't getting them at all. We were standing up to corporate polluters who wanted to increase their pollution in some of the most polluted parts of the entire state. And then we tested every single school in the city of Detroit after we heard about what was happening in Flint. And that work is work that I think matters a lot. And it really showed a different side of what public health can be in places like Detroit, and how it can benefit. I'll even tell you, though, I was doing this while I was watching the governor and his team of accountants poison the same kinds of kids that I was working to protect in Detroit. And that to me was a big wake-up call. It's one thing to answer a public health agenda item. It's another entirely to be able to build your agenda around health. and the challenges of health. And so it became clear to me that if you really want to promote public health, what you have to be able to do is make sure that end, which is a healthy and productive humanity, is part and parcel of everything you do, whether it's your economy, your education system, or your public health system. And then I watched in 2016 as our public conversation nationally started to turn against a lot of the ideals that my dad came here for. A belief that all of us can be American despite the color of our skin or the way that we pray or what we pray to. And a belief in evidence and science is how we should be guiding our decision making, and a belief that equity should be an end unto itself, that we should consistently be working. All of these things were getting dashed by people who were, in effect, leveraging fear to try and come to power. And that to me was really insulting. And I felt like we can do a lot better. I know I believe in this country deeply, and I believe in this country because I believe that we believe in a set of ideals, and we will work to address them and aspire to them despite all odds. And this was a moment, a turn where a lot of that was coming into question. And then, after the election, and as the current president started to do the things that he said he was going to do, I realized that I'd be playing defense to protect a lot of very basic things at the health department, where had I thought about a political position, an elected position, I potentially could go on the offense to protect the things that I cared about most. And that was the final straw for me. And that's when I realized that I really should jump in. Like many of us, I was asking who's going to do something, where are our leaders, et cetera. And I realized that whenever you point a finger, three point back at you. And this was the moment to stand up and to defend the things that I cared about. And so I spoke to the mayor, and I told him, look, I think I want to run for governor. I thought he was going to laugh me out of the room with no elected experience. He said, look, I think you'd be a great governor. And I think if you run and you win, you'll make history. And if you don't, at least you'll have forced a really important conversation, and that's a public service. So I had that conversation with him on a Thursday morning, and on Monday morning, I gave him my 2 weeks, resigned my position, and kicked off my campaign. And we've been off to the races since. So we are, I think, really inspiring a movement of folks about what can be if we're willing to come to terms with where we are and what needs to be done to address it. So I'm really excited and honored to be in this position. I've been able to attract some really awesome people to come be a part of this campaign, and we're going all over the state. I'll tell you, I traded in my gas-guzzling super-powered car for a far less super-powered car, which is a Ford Focus, but Michigan-built. And in the 4 first days since I got the car, I put 1,350 miles on it. So I'm on pace to do 100,000 miles this year, just driving around the state and getting the word out. So we're doing the hard work. We're getting the message out. We will not campaign behind a podium. We will campaign in the hearts and minds of our community, and in living rooms and town halls across the state. And we will say the same things to everyone about what we need to do to reinvest in people in the state, whether they're poor and working people in places like Detroit or poor and working people in places like Ishpeming or Owasso. The message is clear. It's that we have to reinvest in people. And I've been doing that my entire career and hope to continue to do that my entire career.
Abdul, that was remarkable and wow. And we tried to add a little humor also on this, but this isn't going to be so much humor. But I think besides your impressive career and bio up to date, I think you're going to have to add co-host on the Dean Blechman show in the future.
I appreciate that.
It's very impressive. It's unbelievable. It really, your story at the young age, only up until 32 now, is just remarkable. I've got to ask you, how do you avoid burnout? You've got such energy. How do you avoid burnout?
Well, I'll tell you, I've always had just a lot of energy. My parents, I think, the ones who had to avoid burnout first are probably my parents. God bless them. But I think for me, it's about being able to have a couple of touch points that you hold sacred. For me, working out and exercise have always been such an important part of my life, and I normally burn out worst when I don't do that. So I consistently make time to work out in the mornings. I draw on my faith quite a bit, and I pray 5 times a day, and that really is rejuvenating. Prayer is a lot like meditation, and you are really concentrating on one thing and a feeling of gratefulness to God, and that to me is really important. And then time with my loved ones. I've been blessed to be married to one of the most incredible people I've ever met for nearly 11 years now, and she keeps me very, very grounded. Sometimes painfully so, but it's really fantastic to be able to share the journey with her. And so I really try and keep hallowed some time with her and my parents and good friends. And then I really, really enjoy reading, and my favorite is biography. And I think if you can sort of sublimate your experiences through the experiences of other people who have gone through really challenging times, you can see that the challenges that you face are usually not that great and are surmountable. And it helps you to think through, what would I have done in a particular position that this person was in? And it's inspiring, right? Because history has given us, an unending set of a deck of stories that we can pull to and see that the greatest sort of aspiration in humanity to lead on principles and on values that matter, and that's inspiring to me. So between trying to stay healthy, between staying connected to the people I love and I know who love me, and between staying connected to a sense of history and the arc of a narrative that one wants to contribute to, I think those things are really rejuvenating.
Well, listen, I don't know if you remember, but when my wife Sharon and I made those trips out to Ann Arbor to see you guys play lacrosse, we also had the opportunity to meet your future wife, Sarah, as well. And you got a great family. I do want to ask you that experience that you had at the University of Michigan. What did that experience mean in life to you, and obviously embarking on this political career as well?
Yeah, so Michigan, I think, contributed to my development in a number of critical ways, and I'll just give you 5. The first one for me was to be able to recognize that I could achieve on a grand scale for the first time. High school is a small sort of petri dish, and it is very self-contained, and most of the time you don't really have to do the work of fending for yourself, because there are enough people paying attention to you to make sure you don't fall off. And for me, I think for a lot of students, it gets a lot harder when they go to college because there aren't people paying attention. For me, it was the first wake-up call of recognizing that nobody here is going to pay particular attention to you. You have to pay attention to yourself. It's a 37,000 person university. And at the same time, though, there are people who do want to invest in you, and those mentors, whether they be your lacrosse coach or your organic chemistry professor, who, if you seek them out and you find them, you'll have found a mentor for life. And so it taught me how to both take care of myself and be independent in a crowd, and at the same time to find the lifelines, the people who care about you and who you can invest in. And so those are 2. The third is I had the opportunity to be a part of a number of different teams there, and I learned teamwork. I always say playing sports, and it's a lot of folks. When I tell my story and they ask, well, how do you know how to lead people? They're looking for some a huge leadership experience. For me, it was like, how do you actually work with a team of folks who may have very different perspectives on life, but who come together around a particular goal and who all play different roles. And I learned that playing sports, and playing on the men's lacrosse team was really important for my leadership development in a lot of ways. Not because I succeeded, but because sometimes I did. And I learned the feeling of feeling like I let my team down, or like I wasn't the best teammate. And those feelings burnt into me in ways that when contrasted to other leadership experiences, I was able to say, this is what you do and this is what you don't do. And that was really great learning for me. Michigan is a fantastic learning environment, and I had the opportunity to explore all kinds of ideas while I was there. Took classes ranging from medieval French literature to political philosophy to upper level genetics. And being able to just explore in that intellectual environment is fantastic. And I think the best ideas come when you can arbitrage an idea from one intellectual space into another, right? So learning how, the parallels between political philosophy and cell signaling, which seem to be very different in their ways, but they do follow certain, meta patterns that exploring was really important to me. And then, the value of mentors who were able to help me see myself outside of myself. When I started college, I just wanted to be a doctor. And I think that's a really, really worthwhile goal. But I had mentors who sat down with me and said, your future is probably going to be a bit bigger than that. And you need to be able to dream bigger than that. And you need to be able to believe that you can achieve what you set your mind out to. And they showed me that in really great ways, whether it was my organic chemistry professor, Dr. Nolta, who invited me to teach organic chemistry labs and showed me that I really enjoy teaching when I was a sophomore, or my coach, John Paul, who for the first time showed me and said, look, you've got this tenacity about you that I hope you leverage in your life to achieve what it is that you want to achieve. To longtime mentor and close personal friend Sandro Galea, who continues to be a mentor of mine even today, who helped me to see the value in public health and what could be achieved if you focus on policy rather than one patient at a time. And so Michigan was just an incredible opportunity for me, and one that I'll never forget and be very, very thankful for the rest of my life. It's an incredible university. It's an incredible public university, and it is the kind of place that we as a society need to be investing in substantially more, because there's a lot that places like that can offer to all kinds of people.
I think I'll second that. It was for our son Jared, it was just an incredible experience, and continues to be in his professional life. And it's a real special institution when you have a child that goes to the University of Michigan, because it's the greatest school for parents to be involved with as well. And I will tell you that meeting you back in 2005, 2006, during those days when Coach Paul continues to be the coach of this great lacrosse team, that we had an opportunity, Sharon and I, not only to meet you, but some fantastic, unbelievable young men that were a part of that team and institution, that those were years. At those 4 years that we went to visit you guys and our son, they were still some of the greatest years in my life that we will never forget.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So and it was fantastic to be able to meet folks like you. I mean, the thing about the university that's awesome is it inspires everybody to be a part of it. And I think not always do you get to meet parents and families of classmates of yours. And I know that was a very special experience for us and our team as well. So I really appreciate that kind of space that welcomes everyone and engages everyone and allows us to build relationships that continue to flower over time.
There's one more thing I've got to share about your University of Michigan experience that I've got to share with the audience, because this doesn't happen to too many students at graduation. But Abdul had the opportunity to be selected at his 2007 commencement, that he was selected to give a speech in the big house. There must have been 50, 60, 70,000 people in attendance. And to address your fellow students, that must have been an incredible, not only to be selected, but an incredible experience.
It was. I have to tell you, I think to date, that is still the biggest speech I've ever given, and one that I'll always remember. And it's not every day you get to speak in front of 60,000 people and in front of a former president. So it ranks among the highest honors I've ever had, and will always be among the highest honors I've ever had, and I'm very thankful for that.
You should be. It's anybody that never has experience for a football game or any event, being in the largest stadium in the country, the Michigan's Big House. I mean, for you to be asked to be a commencement speaker at your own graduation. Kudos to you. You really remarkable. Listen, an area that a topic obviously Saturday, February 25th of this year, you announced that you were running for governor. I mean, the Detroit Press put out that Abdul El-Sayed, Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, could be both the youngest person to be elected governor since Bill Clinton won Arkansas in 1978 at the age of 32, and the first Muslim in the United States to do so. But they said that despite your accomplishments and dedication to transforming Detroit's health department, that you would face another challenge, and that's overcoming the rise of anti-Muslim sentiment in the current social and political climate. So I thought we'd get into that area a little bit more, and religious identity. I mean, you have spent your entire career investing in people, laying out plans for Michigan's future, reinvesting in public education, public health, jobs, decent jobs, living wages. Is there any way to maybe spend some time on this whole religious identity, maybe tying it in with the immigration ban, wherever you want to go with this? Yeah,
I mean, my faith is something that has always been important to me, and I think like anyone with a ritual practice, whether that is a formalized faith or not, those practices become important to you. And the way that I worship has everything to do with a set of values about what my responsibility and role in the world is. And my faith teaches me to serve. There is a well-known saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, which says that the best of you are the best of you to God's creation. And I take that wholeheartedly, and I see my role as being that of a servant. I think there's a lot of fear around Islam right now, and a lot of that has to do with a generalized fear of the other, and a lot of folks who have twisted the Muslim faith to justify some really terrible things in the world. I think unfortunately the thing about any faith is that it can be used in some terrible ways, just like it can be used in some really incredible ways. I do think right now, in America, the conversation about faith is one that we probably need to have in a very thoughtful way, because our country guarantees a certain set of rights around one's ability to practice as one pleases. And I think, though, that the way we move beyond this is to, rather than ask how one prays or the language one prays in, is to ask what one prays for and what one hopes for. And for me, I know that I pray for my family, and I pray for my community, and I pray for my state, and I pray for my country, just like many Americans of diverse faiths pray. So I hope that throughout this run, the conversation about faith is one that is had in the most mature and thoughtful way, because I think there's an opportunity for us right now to move beyond these divisive questions that certain people have used to separate us from one another, to be thinking about how we connect across the things that we share. And, all of us share a certain love for our families, a certain love for the places that we grew up and hold dear, a certain love for the things that are good in the world, a love for children and our future. And I think if we can see beyond certain differences to those things that we share, I think we're all the better for it. And it is so consistent with the arc of our American narrative. I'm reminded that when the Irish or the Italians or the Eastern Europeans, with their diverse faiths, whether they be Catholic or Jewish, came to this country, they were not always welcomed with open arms. But over time, as they became a part of our American fabric and contributed to this country, they were accepted and ultimately celebrated. I'm reminded, we just celebrated St. Patrick's Day, and this is a Catholic saint who was the patron saint of the Irish, and somebody who really lauded and captures the greatest ideals of our country as one that has accepted immigrants for generations. And I think it's only a matter of time until our country also learns to tolerate, accept, and even celebrate those of us of a different faith. I know that my faith is important to me. I know that faith is important to many others in our country, and I know that I use my faith to fuel a lot of my greatest aspirations for my service to my fellow man, and I know many others feel the same way. And I also know that my faith is consistent with my American identity. Being a Muslim makes me a better American, and being an American makes me a better Muslim. And I think those two things in my heart and in my mind matter a lot to me. And I know that over time, that will become clear to folks. And so I believe in the fundamental decency of our country. I believe in the ideals of our country as being one that is beholden to a true separation of church and state. And I believe that we will, as we always do, overcome any fear that we do have around this, to be about truth and about reconciliation and about our mutual dignity and respect.
Yeah, it's that well said, Abdul. It's just, as I think back and my religion, Judaism, it's just unfortunate fear and hate and what's going on in society today. Even here, I don't know if you're hearing it out in Michigan, but even here in Long Island, that there's been such a huge increase in anti-Semitism across Long Island, New York, and throughout the country. That it's very, very disturbing. I don't know if you have anything to say in regard to why there's such an increase in anti-Semitism now here in this country.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's deplorable, and it is so antithetical to the values of our country. When any of us feel justified to go after or violate the sanctity of other Americans with different faiths. I stand firm with my Jewish brothers and sisters against it, and I think if you look at the public conversation right now, it's easy to overblow the hatred of a few into something that's far bigger than it actually is, right? And I think the biggest thing that religious minorities like you and I have to remember is that when people who harbor a certain amount of hatred and manifest that hatred in certain acts, when they do that, their goal is to try and seem bigger than they really are, and it's to try and instill a certain fear that creates a kind of reaction that shuts people away from each other. And I know it's just a small few. It's not representative of how Americans really feel, but that small few has been empowered by a conversation that I think has been driven at the very top about what is okay and not okay. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the vitriol and hate speech, frankly, that has come out of a number of political movements that ultimately drove the current president to his position. I think that has emboldened people with this hatred that they have had in their hearts. And I want to impress that it's a very, very small few, and ultimately that very, very small few will more than be overwhelmed by, I think, the love and sincerity of most Americans. But they have been given a certain amount of license to say and do certain things that I think are hateful and wrong. And I think the best way forward for us is to resist. And that resistance means two things. It means reaching across religious lines to one another and saying, I am here for you as an American and as somebody who believes in your right and privilege to be and do in the society as you choose to, whichever faith you follow. Mm-hmm. And also, it means being able to call what is wrong, and to do so openly and without fear. And I think so long as we can continue to resist in those two ways, in the end, those elements will go away. I'm a very stubborn optimist about this country, and my optimism is founded in the diversity of my own family. And I believe that if we can see each other as humans first, any of those other things go away, and they will. And it takes time, and it takes us being resistant, and it takes us persisting in building the kind of climate and love and tolerance that we know this country was meant to engender.
Wow. Very powerful. Very powerful. I still feel, once again, it all starts, Abdul, right from birth and in the family, what kids hear and see right in the household. That's right.
Sarah and I don't yet have kids, but we're certainly thinking about it. And one of the things we always talk about with young families is that, the thing that parents do is create norms. They define what is normal for a child, and what is normal means what that kid is exposed to and can come to expect from his or her parents and family about what is said and what is done in life. And I think it's so critical as we think about what we expose our children to, that they are consistently learning what normal means, and we have the ability to tell them hatred is not normal, that going against a fellow human being for being different than you is not normal, that normal behavior is coming together, is learning from each other, is recognizing the mutual humanity in people, and is celebrating difference as something that makes our tapestry that much more vivid. And it's certainly the kind of normal that I hope to be able to build for my kids if and when I have them.
Wow, very exciting. Before I move on to two other last things on our show, is there anything else that you want to talk about on the immigration ban, what's taken place the last couple of months?
I mean, look, unless you were one of the very few who is Native American, who are original peoples to this land, everyone else came here from somewhere, and there's a large minority of our community that came here forcibly, and we are still, as a country, coming to terms with that reality and the long-term consequences of that. And then everyone else came here by choice, and so this notion that some people are less capable of being American than others is inconsistent with over 200 years of our country's history. And I don't care what one quote unquote leader says about their opinions of certain kinds of people. Our country is bigger than that, and will prove itself to be bigger than that. And again, my stubborn optimism tells me that this vitriol that we're hearing out of the White House is an unfortunate blip or a skip in the record of a much more beautiful song that we are consistently writing together. So, it is a moment right now where we have to resist, and we have to remember what our country was founded upon and insist upon it. And then from there, believe in the fact of this country's ability to move beyond leaders who act inconsistently with its greatest ideals. Very well said.
I want to go back to earlier what we talked about, the Flint water crisis. And I have to say, as someone living here in New York on Long Island, that I took a particular interest in following that. I was, Abdul, a little disturbed during the primaries and then during the Trump and Clinton campaigning. It was my personal opinion that there was, from all the candidates, there was very little focus and attention on the Flint water crisis. I don't know if you agree with me or not.
Yeah, I agree. I think the broadest issue that Flint reminds us is that when you run government like a business, oftentimes you fail to pay attention to the most vulnerable of us, and that's entirely what happened under the leadership of a governor in our state who has made his name by cutting costs and also cutting corners. The health department that I rebuilt in Detroit was shut down when the city was facing emergency management and facing its municipal bankruptcy. And it tells you something about values when rather than cut other costs in one fell swoop, an entire health department that's been around for 185 years is ended and privatized. And And that's what happened in Detroit. And then, you look at Flint, and it's the same system of governance that tells us that cutting costs is more important than what is provided for real people in real places. And it tells us, Flint sort of tells us a lot about the story of American infrastructure crumbling, the story of failed leadership, the story of a failure to focus on the challenges faced by the most vulnerable, the story of an unwillingness to pay attention to evidence and science. And it is so, I think the reason it is so astounding is because it sits in the intersection of all of these failures that really threaten our country right now. And so, we need leadership that refocuses not just on solving the individual solutions that would have addressed Flint, but also on making sure Flint doesn't happen again, because we're invested in real people. And we're invested in protecting our most vulnerable. It is about how you orient government more than it is about any one decision that government makes. And so I think the Flint water crisis has to be a touch point for us in terms of thinking about where we go next when it comes to our government, and where we want to be as a society, paying attention to the real challenges that real people face.
I still feel there's people throughout this country, Abdul, that still don't know what the Flint water crisis was and how serious it was. I still think it's still an educational process.
Yeah, and I think it's going to continue to the story will continue to have to be told, because there are a lot of canaries in the coal mine here, and it's easy to pay attention to ignore problems until those problems become imminent and life-threatening for people, as they did in Flint, right? I mean, this is a story of state government wanting to cut costs on water, and doing so without paying attention to necessary safeguards on that drinking water, and then making decisions that were largely driven by a few small and local economic interests that ultimately poisoned thousands of children in a city, and that kids and families continue to suffer from. And this is what happens when we don't pay attention to strong governance, and we don't pay attention to some of our poorest and most vulnerable.
Wow. Could we move on to American Health Care Act, Trump Care versus Obamacare, ACA repeal and its effect on communities in places like Detroit?
Yeah, absolutely. The ACA repeal, the impact that this is going to have for 24 million Americans can't go unnoticed. I'll tell you, in Detroit, 50% of Detroiters are covered via Medicare or Medicaid, excuse me, and the impact that even the change in the way that Medicaid would be funded would have critical implications for those folks. By putting caps on the amount of healthcare that people can have, what we're doing is ultimately rationing healthcare, which would have been an anathema to any conservative government in the past. And that's entirely what they said Obamacare was going to do via quote unquote death panels that you heard a lot about from Sarah Palin. And what we're seeing is an about face on a broken system. We did a video explainer a couple of weeks ago to try and explain exactly why getting rid of the mandates was going to fail. And it was going to lead to people like you and me paying a lot more for healthcare, even while we're failing to cover some of the most vulnerable people in our society. This is an ideological thing. This is about flinging mud onto the face of Obama and Democrats, rather than it is about actually trying to fix a real problem in healthcare. And when you see something as important as healthcare being thrown around like a political pizza, rather than being taken seriously by folks in power, you should ask yourself a fundamental set of questions about what is government doing here. These are the kinds of ways that Flint happens when government puts people in power put short-term influence and short-term political partisanship over long-term well-being of real people in real places. Because those 24 million Americans will suffer without their health care. That's going to lead to people getting sicker, people not having the money to be able to pay for their illnesses. It's going to lead to the fear of not knowing how you pay for your health care in the long term, and people potentially being put in some really, really dire financial straits because they can't pay for life-saving and life-sustaining healthcare services. As a doctor and as a public health public servant, this is to me the worst of what government can do for people, and we have to do better.
Well, very exciting, and I know that this is election for 2018, correct?
That's right.
If people want to, all around the world, or especially here in this country, and including Michigan, if they want to follow you, why don't you share the best way to follow Abdul?
Yeah, three things. First, check out our website at www.abdulformichigan.com. Abdul is ABDUL. Spell out for Michigan, MICHIGAN.com. And then they can follow us on Facebook at Abdul for Michigan, and follow us on Twitter at Abdul El-Sayed, ABDUL-EL-SAYED. And we look forward to folks sharing their insights and comments. And we know that for us to as a campaign to be able to make the impact we want, it's not just about moving one candidate into one position. It's about building a movement around what government can and should be for people. And I've always said that even if I am not successful in this election, which I very well think I will be, but even if I'm not successful and we'll have been able to build that movement, the campaign will have been a success. And so this has less to do with any one candidate, but about a set of ideals and principles on which the country was founded in the first place, and about bringing us back to that set of ideals and principles, and about insisting that government should be by people and for people rather than by corporations and for corporations, to be able to help solve problems that real people face in their lives. And we can and we will do it if real people stand up and reclaim their government, which is what we're trying to do.
Well, listen, I want to thank you very much. I know you've got a very busy schedule. We're coming up on the hour, and this has been incredibly inspiring and educational. And I can't thank you enough for coming on my show.
It's been an honor and a privilege, Dean, and I really, really thank you for the opportunity. We are big fans here at the campaign, and we wish you a continued success with being able to inspire and educate, and we do hope that you'll follow us. Okay.
Well, I'm not only going to follow you, but I just want to let you know that besides the Dean Blechman show here in studio in Setauket, Long Island, if you look at my shows and even on Facebook, Dean Blechman, you're going to see I have a second show that's called Dean on the Street, and I get out there all over the world. And I just want to let you know you could pass on to Adam and Tara, great people that are part of your camp, that I'd be more than happy to travel out to Detroit, Ann Arbor, and do some pretty cool, follow you and do some pretty cool, smaller one-on-one interviews and things that we could do with Dean on the Street out in Ann Arbor, the old days out at Michigan, or even in Detroit. So you have that invitation from me. All you guys got to do is ask, and I'd be happy to come out to Ann Arbor and Detroit.
Well, we appreciate that. It would be awesome to have you, and we'd love to host, and we'd love to engage. So you let us know how we can support that, and we look forward to continuing to get the word out and hopefully build this movement.
Then again, once again, thank you very much for being with me today. And once again, all my listeners, you've been listening to Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, and he is no longer sitting on the sidelines. He's now running as a candidate for governor of Michigan, and you're going to hear a lot about this young man in the days ahead. I want to thank all my listeners for being with us today. And from all of us at the Dean Blechman Show, have a great day.
You've been listening to the Dean Blechman Show, live from Long Island, New York. From all of us here, we'd like to thank you for tuning in. We look forward to hearing your comments via Facebook, Twitter, Skype, and email. And don't forget, you can visit the webpage anytime for the up-and-coming guest list. From all of us here, have a good evening.